Thank you for joining us for a special 06880, the podcast. My guests today are familiar to everyone. First Selectwoman Jen Tooker and Police Chief Foti Koskinas. And both of you have been on the podcast before. You can talk about a lot of things, but today we're going to focus on one, and that's your trip last month to Lyman, Ukraine. Both of you went to Westport's sister city. It was physically demanding. I know it was emotionally draining for a few days, but it was also very important. You went for two reasons: to make sure that Westporters' donation of $252,000 is actually going to the people who need it. And you went to cement our relationships with your counterparts over there, the mayor of Lyman and the police chief.
That's right.
So how did it go? Did you accomplish those goals?
Do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there's so much, and honestly, every time we sit in a forum like this, it actually becomes a little more emotional, a little more real. I would say we certainly, the two things that we were looking for were certainly accomplished, but there was so much more in the relationship building and the human side of it, and actually connecting. It's almost coming out of COVID and doing the Zoom meetings. You never really connected with all the people that we met with, and that's what it felt like. And getting to an in-person visit gave it a completely different look. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I think we emotionally, I wouldn't even say drained. It was just a place I think we've gone to professionally that I haven't felt before.
You know, before we went, before Foti and I went, the founders of Ukraine Aid International, who we traveled with, told us just how important it would be to cement the relationship in person and how much it would mean to our counterparts and to the people of Lyman, of which we met a number. And, you thought, is that really the truth? Is that really the truth? And I can assure you, it is the truth. They were so grateful. And again, I've said this before, they kept calling us heroes. And it was just horrifying. We were like, it was really awkward. We're like, no, you are the heroes in every way. And we're just here to tell you that we are supporting you and doing everything we can to ensure that you prevail, that they are the heroes.
Why did it mean so much? Was it just that somebody cared? Do they know about Westport, or are we just Americans to them?
So I can answer that. I'll take a stab at it, and then I'm sure Foti has a perspective on that as well. So, we had met our counterparts over Zoom, as Foti mentioned, a number of times, and communicated with them in multiple ways. So they are familiar with Westport. They are familiar with, our town and the type of town and the size of town and what our priorities are as a municipality. But to be honest, I think that it was a very impactful trip because Foti and myself were really the first American delegation to go that far east and in Ukraine, and to be that close to the front lines. To hear live artillery in the background. And so that, I think, was incredibly meaningful to our sister city and to other dignitaries at the state level and even at the country level, of whom we met with as well.
Right. So there's so many different levels. In a sense, this started on a Zoom call. And not that we didn't mean it. We said, when do we get to come see you guys? And it was in jest at the moment. And
yes, very much so.
There was a very long pause, like literally everybody that was on the Zoom, and there were some pretty high delegates from Ukraine, not just Lyman, and they were like, you guys would come out here? And we said, if the opportunity came, and it was an opportunity that we could follow through on, we would love to come up. And they said, it doesn't matter what you send to us. The fact that you would stand with us in our zones that have been destroyed would mean so much to our people. I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about it because they were so sincere about it. They're like, we're not turning down your help financially, but you guys willing to stand with us in a time of need, in a moment of crisis, at a time of war, and take the time and effort to come out here, and the personal risk that's attached to it would mean everything to our people and the people who have stuck around to the community. So that really stuck home. I sort of pushed it off because of other obligation. I will say Jen kept bringing it up. Hey, we have a commitment and we're going to follow through. And we certainly did, but there were so many different levels of this because they said before the war started, and let's be, without getting into the politics of it, this has been going on since 2014. This is not something new. But Lyman and other communities like that have learned to live with it. They weren't being ambushed. They weren't being shelled. They were just living life the way we were here, knowing that on the peripheral there's still some type of conflict and there's still conflict with Russia, but it wasn't impacting them day to day. They were living their lives. So to them, Westport, Connecticut, and U.S. in general, it wasn't that it was non-existent. It was not part of their daily life. And they were very open about that. They're like, we didn't think you cared about us, and we really weren't concerned about you. We lived very different lives. So when Marshall and Brian got involved, to them,
this was Marshall and Brian Mayer
from Ukraine International. They were obviously, who are these Americans? Why do they care? Obviously, the first impression is what's in it for them. And I will say personally, after making this visit, I couldn't say it before the visit, Ukrainian Aid International isn't in it for the money. If anything, they're investing personal money to make this work. So it is an incredible cause. But I will say one thing that stuck with us. They said before all this happened, you will most likely never had seen an American flag in Lyman. It would be rare, if ever, or what would be the reason for an American flag to be flying or even be displayed in Lyman. I can tell you during our visit, just about everywhere that was still standing, there was some type of American flag or American support. And they were very clear about that. This was not something that was happening before the war or before Westport got involved. Yep. So if there's anything that, if we were to cut the meeting right now, which is not the case, just that alone, imagine our flag flying in their war-torn area. Because in reality, it wasn't the $250,000 that we gave. It was the gesture, it was the care, it was the whole mannerism on how it happened.
You mentioned the human connection.
Yes.
Did you get really to know these people, and was it just the officials, or did you also get to meet the citizens who are living daily lives in a city far from us?
So we did get to meet a number of residents in Lyman. And it's funny, there's a video that maybe we'll show at some point, and I was just watching it last night, and I hadn't really looked at it before. And I find myself in the video at least probably 5 or 6 times going straight up to strangers, but Lyman residents, and hugging them. And it was like over and over and over again. We met residents outside of a building, of which many of the donations that we made helped rebuild the building, or at least make it livable under certain conditions. We met a number of people involved in the schools and the education system there. We were hosted in a school. We were hosted for a huge, wonderful homemade spread. Still don't know how they pulled it together because there's no electricity and no running water anywhere. So I'm not sure how this happened, but it was probably the only building in which we could have, stood and had a meal with residents and with the mayor and the police chief, and we did. And yes, we did get to know, certainly we got to meet residents, but yes, we did actually get to know our counterparts very well. The mayor does not speak English, so everything we did was with and through a translator, but that was not a problem. He was with us the entire time. The police chief has much better English, so that was a different sort of bond that was able to occur between Foti and his counterpart. But there are only about 2,000 people left in Lyman after, really, it's a town or city the size of ours, between 25 and 30,000 in normal times. And so I feel very lucky that we were able to meet so many of the residents who are continuing to live there and to make Lyman their home. And it was a really important personal connection.
So when the police chief of a affluent suburban American town meets the police chief of a war-torn Ukrainian town, what do you talk about?
So that's a great question. There's quite a bit of information to go on that. I'm just going to touch on what Jen finished on the last question. Relationship building varies in so many different ways depending on what the environment is. And just, we can meet somebody here at the library. It's going to be very different. I can meet them at a meeting. It's very different. Just, you can't lose sight of the circumstances. We traveled thousands of miles to spend time with our counterparts in a war-torn area. That relationship building is very different. And I couldn't explain it before it actually happened. The bond is almost spontaneous because we've both made a commitment to each other just by our gestures of getting there. So it's hard to explain because you felt it the minute you got there. You felt it when you either were worried about our safety. You felt it when they were telling you about their families. You felt it when they told you about their residents that they had lost. And then you certainly felt it as you navigated through the town where 85% of it is truly war-torn. I keep using the phrase, a World War II documentary or a movie that is just that. It's a documentary or a movie. This was every bit of that. So the relationship building was very different. I mean, we have a crisis going on right now, and hopefully there's a level of survival in the people that are in the submarine. I can tell you their relationship, if they do survive, hopefully they do, will be very different than what they anticipated when they were going down on the 2-hour tour. I'm not making reference, these are very different circumstances, but that relationship will never change if hopefully those people survive. In a completely different way. That was our relationship traveling through a war-torn area that with an active war going on and willing to spend that time with them. Now, as far as we're the chief, this was a very similar community, very affluent. They did not have a beach, but they had plenty of lakes. There was recreational. There were facilities set up for people to come in and train for the Olympics. It hadn't even had an opportunity to open yet. It had a rail system. We have 2 train stations for a very different reason, to bring commuters into the city or up and down the Eastern Corridor. They had a rail system that was part of their economy. It was part of the eastern part of Ukraine for supplies, for materials, and also building railways. That's what they did. So they were extremely affluent in their own way for the area that they were at. And the chief's job was very similar. They were worried about traffic. They were worried about property crime. They were worried about the growth of the town and residents moving in and school security and all the things that we deal with in infrastructure, where it quickly turned into they became warriors. I mean, they did. They actively had to fight right up to the last minute. The police officers were embedded into the military, which was a very difficult decision because they also practice the same policing that we do. That's not the goal of local police or state police or anything like that. And then coming back after occupation, the police chief, who had a very similar job and responsibilities, preparing a budget, doing things and make sure manpower allocation and all the different things that go in, equipment, is now investigating war crimes in the sense of mass graves and reporting directly to the UN with his findings. That's not, we don't train for that, and he certainly hadn't trained for that. So that changed drastically. And now morale becomes an issue. And how do you keep a workforce in a war-torn area when they have to worry about their families? And now they don't even have a home to live in. So that's what we talked about. How do you navigate through the difficult times, and how do you pull people together when things seem to just be at their very end? But they're making it happen. And it made a difference to have that conversation. So I've been texting with the chief almost every day since we've been back. Little things. Some of them are funny things. Some of them are, hey, we got hit really bad last night. Some of it is pictures of his family that is in an undisclosed area away from Lyman. And, they're worried about him, and they're asking him, why don't you just, enough's enough. What are we doing? Come back with your family. Anything any father or husband would hear. So those are the kind of things we talked about. Very human.
As you went over there, you must have had expectations or thoughts about what it would be like. What sights, sounds, smells were you not prepared for?
I can answer that with 2 examples. I'll start with smell. I was definitely not prepared for the smell of burnt flesh. And when and how that happened was we were standing in essentially a graveyard of Russian military artifacts in Lyman. our sister city had decided they wanted to kind of corral as much as possible abandoned Russian military tanks and all sorts of different artillery. And we were walking around there, and it's one of the only places we could actually walk around because we knew there were no landmines. We did very little walking because of that, either because of the destruction, the rubble, or worry about landmines. And so, but we were able to walk around this graveyard, and just peering into abandoned tanks and other artillery, you could just smell the burnt flesh. Wow. I don't think I ever would have prepared for that. And I think the other thing I would say for me was just the amount of abandoned military equipment everywhere. I mean, pretty much everywhere east of Kyiv. Mm-hmm. You know, everywhere. You'd look on both sides of the road as you're driving. I mean, remember, we traveled, 1,600 miles in 4 days? So we were in the car a lot. But just specifically from Kyiv east, it's just on both sides of the road, just missiles sticking out of the ground, you know, tanks just abandoned in the middle of a field. Never would I have thought I would see that.
Oh, my emotions on this are truly all over the place, because I'll rewind even a little bit. Crossing the border from Poland into the Ukraine, one of the first things we did is download an app on our phone, similar to what we have for Nixle here in town, to let you know there's traffic or there's some type of event going on. But what it does is it lets you know that there's incoming airstrikes in your direction. And some of them are very specific, and some of them are very broad. I mean, the very broad could be that, you know, Russian fighter jets just took off from an undisclosed area heading this way. The very specific is that there's been a launch, and hopefully it will be intercepted, but they're coming in your direction. So picture that going off, not often, relatively often, but when it went off, it was very real. And it was the decision, do we go to bunker? Do we stay where we're at? What do we do? So that was our first impression going in country. It became very real once we went past Kyiv, like Jen said. It was, you could just see so much damage, so much devastation. I do want to highlight through all of that, though, there was still active work going on of building and working in their cities. There's still skyscrapers being built. There's still roads being built, not just being repaired. There's still bridges being built. I mean, they're keep going. I mean, they're truly resilient people that are just following through. As far as right up to the war zone in Lyman and hearing those, there is no preparation. I mean, there was no preparation for what we've seen. Picture 85% of the community. It's just either been hit by tank artillery or other artillery or fighter jets or helicopters. And like Jen said, you know, where do you go that you see downed military helicopters all over the place?
Just all over the place.
Downed fighter jets, complete fighter jets just laying in a field, either burned or just partially broken up. And then the tanks by the hundreds. The personnel carriers by the hundreds. There was no number that you could keep. I mean, I could probably tell you we saw, 10, 15 helicopters and a handful of fighter jets that were down. But the tanks and personnel carriers just everywhere. And there isn't the local funeral home that you call to come clean these up. It's a lot of them are just the way they're left. And over time, they'll get to them and clean them up. And then the other huge concern as far as feelings is the landmines.
Yeah.
You were cautious everywhere other than a paved roadway where you stepped.
Yeah.
And you weren't allowed, they said, if you need to go to the bathroom, let us know. We'll find a place. We'll do something. But don't feel like you can just walk into the wood line. That's not something that's going to work here. It's not a good ending. So picture, it's constantly in the back of your head. You're processing and taking it all in. But I don't think there's words that can describe it. It becomes very emotional.
Thinking at levels you've never thought before.
Yes.
You mentioned the debris, and one of the ways in which Westport's contributions were used were for trash trucks and police vehicles. Can you talk about how you actually saw the Westport's contributions being used?
I'll let Foti talk about the police vehicles, but I'll I'll just talk about we're giggling about the trash trucks. I don't know why we're giggling, but because it was amazing. We saw the trash trucks in action the entire time we were in Lyman. There were two. There's a big one and a little one, and it was almost like they were so busy and they were everywhere. It was almost like we were wondering if it was like a some sort of hidden camera or something like that. Those trash trucks are absolutely used constantly, and it is the only way and the only reason that Lyman that almost 2,000 residents that are there are able to stay there is because they're able to actually clean up portions of the destruction and just be able to clean up the city. And so I really can't emphasize enough how important that particular donation was from our community. And I can't say thank you enough to our community for making sure that those essential 2 trucks were delivered. They are used all the time.
Yeah, no, that's, I think people deserve, and absolutely, if we're asking for more donations and more support, they deserve to know where it's going. So during the tour, and it was interesting because I've been doing this long enough to know that this was not choreographed, but every little neighborhood or every street that we visited, and it wasn't planned because of security reasons, obviously, people would come out in their nicest clothes that they had left to say thank you. And those were genuine thank yous and hugs and through translators, and you could see it. And the reason I'm bringing that up with this question is because every one of them made a point of saying, we couldn't live where we're living right now if it wasn't for the plywood that was delivered because of you guys. We would not have any cover. And another one of their version of building officials that was also a resident that came out and said, you see that building over there and that building over there, and 3 or 4 different buildings. The only reason we're going to be able to salvage them is because you brought metal roofing in that you paid for directly and it was shipped here. And you even paid for some of the workers to install the metal roofing because as we went through our winter, this building would not have survived and it wouldn't have been habitable at any point. And then it grew from there because as we visited the police station and town hall, due to the impact of the shelling, of how quickly they had to move out and the different variables, they had lost everything. So we've been able to give them laptops. We've been able to give them tablets. And that's how they're doing their day-to-day work and reporting to the UN or reporting internally to their national police. And the police cars, they're 2 very modest, non-looking police cars.
No Teslas?
No Teslas. We're going to ship one over in due time. But no Teslas. They're very modest European cars that we were able to find with the intention of you can still get parts for them. You can repair them easily. You can do things to get them through town. So they're all-wheel drive, but very practical. And they said we just wouldn't have anything. And when I tell you that, the only cars that were running, the vehicles that were there, were the ones that we visited in and the one the police chief and the mayor had access to. The residents that are there don't have cars.
They don't have anything.
There is no transportation.
There's no
It's either walk around.
There's no transportation.
The other part that was, we were able to send over a lot of bulletproof vests, older bulletproof vests. And you would think those are going right to the military or the police. They're not. They're going to their utility workers. So in order to support their utility workers to come in and work on infrastructure, both gas lines and electric and water, they have to give them a certain level of safety because they're still in active war. So by giving that, not only were we supporting the military and the police, we're supporting their first-line workers that are actually getting what the people need. And we saw that. We saw that throughout. They were working on gas lines. They were working on power lines. And those are the things that we've been able to support them with.
And I know you had done a lot of work with Ukraine Aid International, founded by 2 Westporters, Brian and Marshall Mayer. But I think you got a different sense of what they do once you were over there, how they get stuff the last mile.
So they do, and that that's essentially why I agreed, and we were the first town or municipality to sign on to the sister city concept. I think back to our original meeting in November, where they came into my office and they explained what they were setting up. They explained their relationship with Alex 21, which was another nonprofit that was doing work on the ground, really listening to this personalized view and way of delivering humanitarian aid. and going into places where nobody else is going, Dan. Nobody else. They're delivering aid for other humanitarian aid organizations because they are truly risking their lives on the ground to go that far east, to go that close to the front lines, to deliver aid to these towns that probably would have been forgotten. And when they explained that, and we were recounting that first conversation in November, and I said, I'm in. What do you need? What do you want? I knew that they were something special, but after this trip, we really, really can confirm this organization and the people, Brian and Marshall Mayer, who run it, and a number of other colleagues on the ground in Ukraine are truly very special. They are doing something that other organizations are not doing. And we should be so proud as a community to be supporting them.
It really is a Westport story. And before I talk about and conclude with some information about the July 9th event, anything I should have asked? Any final word pictures that you want to paint?
So I do want to say thank you to the students at Bedford Middle School and Kings Highway Elementary School and a number of other kids in town, along with forging personal and in-person relationships with our counterparts. We also delivered a personalized card for every single child in Lyman. So I came over with this huge bag full of 500 cards. And I can tell you, because we were in the school, the only school that's still operating and still standing, we were in the classroom seeing, exactly how they welcome kids on a daily basis into the school and try to create as normal of an academic experience as possible. I can tell you those cards really, really mean the world to those kids. So I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who participated in that, and just know that you created a moment of hope for these kids who can't go out and run around and play in their backyard at this point. And with how long it'll take to figure out where landmines are and how many of them there are, I don't know when those kids are going to be able to use their recreational facilities again. I don't know when that's going to happen. So that was really just awesome. So thank you very much to everybody involved in that.
Yeah, I'll just add a very little bit that Ukrainian Aid International is actually a very small group of committed people. It's not, when people look at this is not this huge organization that funds are going into salaries and benefits and this and that. They're really spending every last penny in giving back while supporting their few employees and volunteers. Everything goes right back, and that was really good to see. Additionally, and I won't mention the names because it wouldn't be fair to the very large organizations that are giving aid over there, because they're certainly there and people can assume and guess what they are. They're very limited to what they can do at times, especially in the very high conflict areas. But those are the most needed areas when it comes to help. And Ukrainian Aid has built the relationships with their national police, with their patrol police, which is really the only groups that are keeping things going within the country right now.
That's right.
And they've built those relationships that they can reach out to the bigger organizations, or better yet, we're finding out that the bigger organizations are reaching out to them to make exactly what you said, the delivery to that last mile, because of red tape, bureaucracy, insurance, all the things that we navigate through here on a day-to-day basis. Believe it or not, even in a war-torn area, those factors still exist. And Ukrainian Aid has found a way to actually take those needed supplies while they're sitting in warehouses and take that last mile, which is probably the most dangerous, but probably the most effective, and make those deliveries at the most needed time. And if it wasn't for that, if we just made a visit and we just found another group that's stockpiling supplies, I can tell you we wouldn't be sitting with you or pushing as hard as we are for this organization. Right. And I will highlight it that they also focus on what's needed at that very moment. So when the dams were damaged and everything was flooded, they pulled all their resources. Not that they turned their back on Lyman and the other communities, but they pulled all their resources and realized that there's people without drinking water now. Right. So they brought whatever water purification systems. They went right to the most devastated areas due to the dam damage and gave people drinking water and bread. That was the only things that they could do. And since I said bread, I'll just finish off on this before you close out, that during our tour, there was this one woman, I was most touched by it because I was trying to understand the little bit of English that was going on, the little bit of Russian, the little bit of Ukrainian, and a translator. And this woman came out of her house running, crying. And I'm like, what just happened? You know, we're hearing artillery. What could be going on? And she came up to one of the workers, one of the employees, now employees, started as a volunteer. This woman, Liz, that works for Ukrainian Aid, works directly, and she had started another organization before that, Alex 21. And this woman ran to her and said, you were here the second day of liberation, and you gave me bread and water I hadn't eaten in days. And you guys made your way here and gave us bread and water, and I will never forget you. So to me at that point, I'm like, what do I have to do from this point?
That's the work they're doing.
Yeah, that's the work that they're doing.
And that's the work that you saw. That's
Yes.
the work that we're able to convey. I need to say that the trip was not funded by any town dollars.
No.
Thank you.
It was all privately funded. And the party on July 9th, Sunday, July 9th, is also privately underwritten.
That's right.
All of Westport is invited. Starts at 1 o'clock Sunday, July 9th at the Ukrainian American Club, which everyone has passed and no one knows it's there. But as you drive into Southport on the Post Road, exit 19, the entrance ramp of 95, it's just past that entrance ramp, exit 19.
Yep.
All of Westport is invited. It is a thank you party. It is free. There's food, there's drinks, there's entertainment. The mayor will be on a big screen.
He will be.
It will be a great time, all free, and plenty of opportunities also to help Ukraine. There will be raffles. There will be book pulls. There will be auctions. There will be all kinds of opportunity to help. But we want to get the word out to all of Westport, whether you gave in the winter or not. Doesn't matter. Come out to the Ukrainian American Club on Sunday, July 9th, 1 o'clock until 7 p.m., whenever you can get there. You will have a good time, and you'll see
You'll see us there.
Selectwoman.
Yes, we will both be there for sure.
Dan, if I can add to that, there's a little side story to the whole Ukrainian Club. One of my retired police officers, who was a Westport family, the Goodzik, I don't know if you remember Mike Goodzik.
Sure.
He is the manager, and upon retirement, he took over. He has a Ukrainian heritage. He's a retired police officer, and he's taken over well before the conflict, before anything. So this continues to have a little connection to our police department. He is a very big part of this event. And again, a Westport family, Ukrainian background, and a police officer.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's great, right?
The tagline of 06880 is where Westport meets the world.
Yeah.
And there could be no better example of Westport meeting the world and this very important part of the world than this. Yep. So for Selectwoman Tooker, Chief Koskinas, thank you for going over, for representing us well, and for telling the story so vividly and poignantly here today. Thank you.
Well, Dan, thank you for everything you have done to make sure that this community knows about Ukraine Aid International, knows about the Sister City concept, knows about what's going on in Ukraine, and bringing us all together to support this organization and these people. So thank you.
And we'll see you all July 9th.
See you on July 9th.
Thank you.